Blood stained the wooden planks of the dusty street. It wasn't much, just a smear, but it was enough. Willow Johnson clutched her torn sleeve, her breath catching in her throat like a trapped bird. 3 men were closing in, their shapes dark against the dying sun of Redemption Creek. Montana Territory, 1878. The air was getting cold, but Willow was sweating. "Ain't polite to refuse a drink with paying customers, miss," growled the tallest of the 3. His voice was a gravel road, his breath a foul mix of cheap whiskey and chewing tobacco. He took a step closer, and Willow took a step back. A mistake. It only cornered her against the wall of the general store. "I've already told you," she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray the fear she was trying so desperately to hide. "I don't work at the saloon. I'm the school teacher." She'd only been in this dusty, forgotten town for 2 months. 22 years old, fresh from Boston, hoping to build a new life. A quiet life. A respectable life. She was quickly learning that Redemption Creek offered none of those things. But what these men didn't know, what no one in this town knew, was that Willow Johnson wasn't running toward a new life. She was running from an old one, and it was catching up to her. "School's out, teacher," laughed another man. He was shorter, stockier, with a mean-spirited glint in his eye. He shot out a hand and grabbed her arm. His fingers were like iron bands, calloused and dirty, and she knew they would leave a mark. "Time for some adult education." Willow twisted, trying to pull free, but her struggle was like a mouse fighting a hawk. It only made them laugh harder, their amusement echoing in the empty street. Where was everyone? Most folks were home, sitting down to supper, closing their doors against the night. No one was coming to help. No one ever did. "Please," she begged, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "Let me go." They started dragging her then, her heels digging uselessly into the dirt. Their target was obvious, the swinging bat-wing doors of the Golden Nugget, the roughest saloon this side of the territory. A place a woman like her should never, ever go. "Just one drink," the third man wheezed, his eyes crawling over her in a way that made her skin feel thin and cold. "You city girls think you're too good for the likes of us." He was wrong. She didn't think she was too good for them. She was terrified of them. But she was more terrified of what they represented. They weren't just drunk cowboys. Their questions had been too specific earlier in the day. Asking about newcomers, asking about a woman from Boston. They were looking for someone. They were looking for her. The saloon doors slammed open as they shoved her inside. The piano music died with a discordant twang. Every head in the smoky room turned. For a single breathless moment, there was silence. Then the room erupted. Not with concern, but with whoops and hollers, with raucous cheers. They weren't seeing a woman in distress. They were seeing entertainment. "Look what we found wandering the streets, boys," the tall one bellowed, shoving Willow so hard she fell to her knees on the filthy floorboards. Sawdust and spilled whiskey clung to her dress. Humiliation burned hotter than fear. From a corner table, a man set down his glass. His name was Jake Reynolds, and he had come to Redemption Creek looking for one thing: to be left alone. At 28, he'd seen enough cruelty to last 10 lifetimes. The war had carved lines into his face and put a permanent winter in his eyes. He worked as a hand at the Triple B Ranch, preferring the company of cattle to men. He rarely came to town, but tonight he was meeting the ranch owner about a cattle drive. A meeting he was starting to regret. He recognized the woman on the floor, the new school teacher. She'd arrived on the same stagecoach as him 2 months back. She'd been clutching a worn-out carpet bag and a book of poetry, looking like a lost lamb in a den of wolves. He'd seen the fear in her eyes then too, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination. He'd tipped his hat. She'd given a slight, nervous nod. They hadn't spoken a word, but he remembered her. He remembered the name of the poet on her book, Tennyson. And Jake Reynolds had a weakness for people who read poetry in a world determined to grind all the beauty out of itself. He also had a weakness for bullies who picked on the helpless. It was a flaw that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. "Let her go," Jake said. His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't a shout, but it sliced through the noise of the saloon like a razor. Every eye swiveled from Willow to him. He stood up from his table, slowly, deliberately. He wasn't a big man, not tall like the one who'd been tormenting her, but he moved with a kind of coiled stillness, a dangerous grace that promised violence. The calm in his eyes wasn't peace, it was control. "Mind your business, Reynolds," one of the men spat, turning away from Willow. "This ain't your concern." "I'm making it my concern," Jake replied, taking a step forward. His hand was nowhere near the Colt peacemaker on his hip, but the simple fact of its existence seemed to suck the air out of the room. Every man in that saloon knew what a pistol was for, but looking at Jake, you got the feeling he knew it better than most. Willow looked up from the floor, her eyes meeting his. In the midst of her terror, a tiny, impossible flicker of hope ignited. She didn't know this man. She had no reason to trust him. But in his eyes she saw something she hadn't seen in any other man's face tonight. She saw a line, and he was not going to let them cross it. But Willow had a secret, a terrible one. And this quiet stranger, this unlikely hero, had no idea what he was stepping into. By helping her, he wasn't just starting a saloon brawl, he was stepping into a war he didn't know was being fought. And he was about to make himself a target. "The lady doesn't want to be here," Jake continued, his voice low and even. He took another step. "And I reckon she's got the right to choose her own company." The air in the saloon was thick enough to chew. The bartender was slowly, ever so slowly, reaching a hand under the counter. Everyone knew about the sawed-off shotgun he kept there. The piano player sat frozen on his stool, hands in his lap. This was no longer entertainment. This was a prelude to bloodshed. The tall man smiled, a greasy, confident smirk. He let go of Willow's arm to square up with Jake. His hand drifted down, hovering just over the butt of his own pistol. "You willing to bleed for some uppity schoolmarm?" he challenged. Jake's expression didn't change. "I'd rather not," he answered, his voice still unnervingly calm. "But I've bled for less worthy causes." And then all hell broke loose. The man went for his gun. He was fast. But Jake was faster. Not with his pistol, with his fists. He moved like lightning, a blur of motion that the whiskey-soaked eyes of the crowd could barely follow. Before the man's gun had even cleared its leather holster, Jake's fist had crashed into his jaw with the sound of snapping bone. The man crumpled, out cold before he hit the floor. One down. The second man, the stocky one, let out a roar and charged, tackling Jake around the waist. They slammed into a nearby table, sending cards and glasses flying. The wood splintered and collapsed under their weight. Patrons scrambled out of the way, some pulling their own weapons, others just trying to get out of the line of fire. In the chaos, Willow saw her chance. She scrambled to her feet and made a dash for the swinging doors, for the promise of the dark street outside. She almost made it. A hand tangled in her hair, yanking her back with a vicious, pain-filled jerk. She cried out as the third man, the wheezing one, spun her around. His eyes were wide and crazed. "You're not going anywhere," he hissed. Jake threw the stocky man off him with a powerful heave, following it up with a kick to the ribs that sent the man gasping to the floor. He turned, his eyes scanning the brawl, and saw Willow. He saw her being dragged, not toward the door, but toward the back of the saloon, toward the dark hallway that led to the private rooms. And and a cold, familiar rage took hold of him. 3 more men, saloon regulars looking for a good time, decided to join the fray. They blocked his path, grinning like hyenas. One of them swung a broken bottle, its jagged edge glinting in the lamplight. Jake twisted, but not fast enough. The glass sliced across his ribs, tearing through his shirt and drawing a hot line of blood. He barely registered the pain. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, using him like a battering ram to knock the other 2 off balance. "Get out of my way," Jake growled, his voice a low thunder that promised a storm. More men were closing in now, a circling pack. A punch caught him on the jaw, snapping his head back. He tasted blood, the coppery tang sharp on his tongue. He didn't falter. He just kept moving forward. From the back of the room, Willow screamed. That sound cut through the noise, through the pain, through the rage. It focused him. He hadn't come to town looking for a fight. He had come to town seeking peace. But peace was a luxury he had long ago given up on. And in that moment, saving this woman, this stranger with the poetry book and the haunted eyes, felt like the only thing in the world that mattered. It felt like a chance. A chance for what? He didn't know. But he would not let it slip away. With a roar of his own, he waded back into the fight. He wasn't just a ranch hand anymore. He was something else, something older, something far more dangerous. He moved with a brutal efficiency, a grim knowledge of how to hurt a man, how to break him. Fists found jaws, boots found kneecaps. He grabbed a chair and swung it, clearing a path through the sea of bodies. Finally, he broke through the crowd. He saw her. She was at the entrance to the hallway, still fighting. Her dress was torn, her hair was a mess, but she was kicking and clawing and biting like a cornered wildcat. The man holding her was laughing, enjoying her struggle. Jake crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't say a word. He grabbed the man by the collar, spun him around, and slammed his face into the wall. The plaster cracked. The man slid to the floor in a heap. Jake turned to Willow. Her eyes were wide, filled with a terrifying mix of gratitude and raw fear. "Come on," he said, his voice rough. He held out his hand. She took it. Her fingers were ice cold against his. The saloon had descended into utter madness behind them. The fight Jake had started had become a free-for-all. Old grudges were being settled with fists and furniture. He pulled Willow close, tucking her behind him, shielding her with his body as he began to carve a path back to the entrance. A whiskey bottle shattered on the wall next to his head, spraying them with glass and cheap liquor. A gunshot rang out, the bullet splintering the doorframe just as they reached it. Willow gasped and pressed herself closer against his back. He could feel her trembling. He didn't slow down. When they hit the Batwing doors, he didn't just push through them. In one fluid motion, he scooped her up into his arms and carried her out into the night. He didn't stop running until the sounds of the brawl were a dull roar behind them, until the cool night air filled his aching lungs. He finally set her down on the porch of the doctor's office, though he kept a hand on her elbow to steady her. Blood was seeping through his shirt now, a dark stain spreading across his ribs. A nasty bruise was already purpling on his cheek. But his eyes were clear, and they were focused only on her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "Nothing serious," she managed, trying to smooth her ruined dress. "Thanks to you." She looked up at his battered face, at the blood on his shirt, at the impossible calm that had settled back into his eyes. "Why did you do that? You don't even know me." Jake was quiet for a long moment. He looked away, down the dark street toward the faint lights of the town's edge. "Some things don't need explaining, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet. "It was the right thing to do." Before she could answer, the door behind them opened. Lamplight spilled out onto the porch, illuminating them in a golden square. Dr. Samuel Wilson, a gray-haired man with weary but kind eyes, took in the scene with a practiced glance. "Miss Johnson, Mr. Reynolds," he sighed, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. "Good Lord, what happened to you two?" "Trouble at the saloon," Jake said simply. "There always is," the doctor replied, ushering them inside. Come in, come in. Let's get you patched up." As Dr. Wilson cleaned and stitched the cut on Jake's ribs, Willow couldn't look away from his face. He barely winced, his expression stoic, almost distant, as if the pain was happening to someone else. It was the face of a man who was no stranger to pain, a man who had endured far worse than a bar fight. She wondered what kind of life he had lived, what kind of secrets were hidden behind those quiet, watchful eyes. Who was Jake Reynolds? She had come to Redemption Creek to escape her past. But as she watched this stranger who had bled for her, a terrifying thought took root in her mind. What if she had just dragged him into it? "You're a lucky man, Mr. Reynolds," Dr. Wilson said, tying off the final stitch. "Another inch to the left, and this cut would have found your lung. We'd be having a very different conversation." Jake just nodded, pulling his tattered shirt back over the fresh bandage. "Wouldn't be the first time luck's been on my side when it shouldn't have been." The words were casual, but they hung in the air with a weight that made Willow shiver. After the doctor had tended to her own scrapes and bruises, Jake insisted on walking her home. The night had turned cold, and he draped his coat over her shoulders. She protested, but he wouldn't hear it. They walked through the quiet streets, the only sound their boots on the packed earth. "I'm Jake Reynolds," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I work out at the Triple B." "Willow Johnson," she replied, though she was sure he already knew. "I've only been here 2 months." "I know," he said. "Same stagecoach." He glanced at her, just for a second. "You were reading Tennyson." Willow was stunned. He'd noticed. He'd remembered. In her experience, men like the ones at the saloon didn't notice books. You know Tennyson?" A faint smile touched his lips, a brief crack in his stoic mask. "I've been known to read a book or two, Miss Johnson." When they reached her small cottage by the schoolhouse, she hesitated on the steps. "Would you like to come in? I could make coffee. It's the least I can do." He looked like he wanted to. For a moment, the loneliness in his eyes was so profound it made her ache. But then he shook his head. "Better not. Town's got enough to gossip about tonight without adding the schoolteacher entertaining a ranch hand after dark." He was right. Her position here was fragile. But still, she felt a sharp pang of disappointment. "Thank you again, Mr. Reynolds," she said softly. "Jake," he corrected. "Good night, Miss Johnson." "Willow," she replied. He tipped his hat and melted back into the darkness, leaving her alone on the porch, wrapped in the lingering warmth of his coat. She went inside, her mind racing. Jake Reynolds was not what he seemed. He was more than just a ranch hand. The way he fought, the way he carried himself, the sadness in his eyes. There was a story there, a deep, complicated story. And she was beginning to realize that the men from the saloon were not what they seemed either. They weren't just local troublemakers. Their questions, their persistence. They were hunters, and they had found their prey. The next morning, Willow was at the schoolhouse early, trying to lose herself in her work, when Sheriff Thomas Miller appeared at her door. He was a big man, with a carefully trimmed mustache and an air of unshakable authority. "Miss Johnson," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. "Heard there was some trouble last night." She told him everything. He listened patiently, his face unreadable. "I've got 2 of them locked up," he said when she finished. "The tall one's still at Doc Wilson's with a broken jaw. Reynolds did quite a number on them." He paused, studying her. Seems a bit extreme for a simple ranch hand, wouldn't you say? The question was casual, but it felt like a probe. He was protecting me, Willow said, her voice sharp. The sheriff smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course, I'm not looking to cause any trouble for Reynolds. He's a good man, keeps to himself. He put his hat back on. You be careful, Miss Johnson. This can be a rough town for a woman alone. The warning sounded less like advice and more like a threat. As he walked away, a cold dread settled in Willow's stomach. The sheriff hadn't been gathering facts. He'd been confirming them, confirming who she was. She wasn't safe. She'd made a terrible mistake coming here. Later that day, as school let out, she saw him. Jake was leaning against a hitching post across the street, watching the schoolhouse. When the last child had gone, he walked over. The bruise on his cheek was a dark, angry purple. Wanted to make sure you were all right, he said, his voice low. I'm fine, she lied. The sheriff paid me a visit this morning. Jake's eyes narrowed. Did he now? What did he have to say? He said he has the men in custody. He said, you were a good man. Jake didn't seem pleased. He scanned the street, his gaze lingering on the sheriff's office. He's right about one thing. You do need to be careful. He looked back at her, and his eyes were serious. More careful than you're being. It was a warning, the same one the sheriff had given her, but from Jake, it felt different. It felt real. What did he know? Or what did he suspect? Over the next few weeks, a strange and dangerous courtship began. Jake would ride into town, and they would talk, sometimes walking by the creek, always in public, always with a careful distance between them. They talked of books and the weather and the wide Montana sky. They never talked about what was really on their minds. Willow knew she was being watched. She would see the sheriff's deputy loitering near her cottage. A stranger in town would watch her a little too long at the general store. They weren't making a move. They were waiting. And Jake saw it too. He never mentioned it, but she could see it in the way he never turned his back on the street, the way his eyes were always moving, assessing. He wasn't just courting her. He was standing guard. A silent one-man army between her and the shadows. One evening they were sitting on a bench outside the church. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery colors. You're not from Boston, Jake said quietly, not looking at her. Willow's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Of course I am. Your accent, he said. It's good, almost perfect. But sometimes when you're tired or surprised, it slips. You sound more like you're from New York, upstate, maybe. She stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Who was this man? And the men at the saloon, he continued, his voice still low and even. They weren't local boys. Their boots were wrong, too clean, too expensive. And the tall one, he had a tattoo on his wrist, a small anchor inside a serpent. That's the mark of the Blackwood Shipping Company. He turned to look at her then, and his eyes held no judgment, only a deep, weary understanding. Whoever you are, Willow, he said, you've brought a whole lot of trouble to my quiet little town. His words hung in the air between them, an accusation and a promise all at once. She could run. She could get on the next stagecoach and disappear again, find another town, another name. Or she could trust him. But trusting him meant telling him the truth. And the truth was a story written in blood and betrayal, a story that had followed her across a continent. A story that would almost certainly get them both killed. Her real name was not Willow Johnson. It was Annabelle Covington. And she had not come west to teach children. She had come west because she had witnessed a murder. And she had stolen the only thing that could prove it. Blackwood, she whispered, the name tasting like poison. Thaddeus Blackwood. Jake's face went pale under his tan. The look in his eyes was no longer just weary understanding. It was a flash of something else, something sharp and cold. Recognition. He knew the name. "I have to go," he said abruptly, standing up. He didn't look at her. He looked past her, at the shadows deepening between the buildings. "It's not safe for us to be seen together anymore." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone on the bench as darkness swallowed the town. He didn't offer to walk her home. He didn't say goodnight. He just left. Panic seized her. She had made a terrible mistake. She had said the name, the one name that connected all the pieces. She hadn't just put him in danger. She had reminded him of it. That night she didn't sleep. She sat in her small cottage, a pistol she'd bought from the general store resting on her lap, and she waited. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind was the sound of them coming for her. But they didn't come. The next day, a package arrived. It was left on her doorstep, a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a book, Tennyson, and tucked within its pages was a train ticket to San Francisco, leaving in 2 days. There was no note, but she knew who it was from. It was his way of telling her to run. Run far, run fast, and don't look back. It was his way of telling her he wanted no part of her war. He had his own ghosts, and he had no room for hers. The disappointment was a physical ache in her chest. She had hoped, for a foolish moment, that he would be different, that he would stay, that he would fight. But he was just like everyone else. He was saving himself. She packed her bag. She would take his advice. She would run. 2 days later, she was standing on the platform waiting for the eastbound train. She was going to disappear again, find a new name, a new town. Maybe this time she would be more careful. The train whistle blew in the distance, the sound of her escape. Then she heard another sound. Hoofbeats, fast, urgent. She looked up and saw a rider coming hard down the main street, kicking up a cloud of dust. It was Timothy, one of the young hands from the Triple B. He reined his horse in so sharply it reared, its eyes wide with panic. "Miss Johnson!" he yelled, his face pale and streaked with sweat. "You gotta come. It's Jake." Willow's heart stopped. What? What happened?" "Stampede," Timothy gasped, fighting to control his horse. "During the cattle drive. They sent me to find you. The doc says it's bad, real bad. He's been asking for you." The train ticket felt like a lead weight in her pocket. He hadn't run. He had gone on the cattle drive, just like he'd planned. He hadn't abandoned her. He had tried to save her, the only way he knew how, by sending her away. And now he was dying. The stampede hadn't been an accident. She knew it with a sickening certainty. They hadn't come for her. They had gone for him. They had identified him as her protector, and they had removed him from the board. She looked at the approaching train, then back at Timothy's desperate face. She had a choice. She could get on that train and save herself, or she could go to him, and in doing so, walk right back into the trap she had been so desperate to escape. She ripped the train ticket from her pocket and threw it to the ground. "Take me to him," she said. The ride to the Triple B was a blur of wind and fear. When they arrived, Mrs. Bradley, the ranch owner's wife, met her at the door, her face a mask of grief. "He's in the master bedroom," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "He wouldn't let us move him." Willow ran up the stairs. The room was dim, the curtains drawn. Jake lay on the bed, so still and pale she thought for a horrifying second that she was too late. His body was a landscape of bandages and bruises. An arm was in a splint, strapped to his chest. A deep gash on his forehead was crudely stitched together. Doc Wilson sat in a chair beside the bed, looking exhausted. "He's alive," the doctor said softly. "By all rights, he shouldn't be. He was trampled. A dozen horses went right over him. 3 broken ribs, a shattered arm, internal bleeding. It's a miracle. Too stubborn to die, a weak voice rasped from the bed. Jake's eyes fluttered open. They found her, and a faint, pained smile touched his lips. Knew you wouldn't get on that train. Tears streamed down Willow's face as she knelt by his side, taking his uninjured hand in hers. They did this to you, she whispered. This is my fault. My choice, he corrected, his voice barely a whisper. His fingers tightened around hers. Listened to my own advice. Decided not to bleed for a cause that wasn't worthy. He coughed, a raw, painful sound. Reckon you're a worthy cause, Willow Johnson. He was delirious with pain, but his eyes were clear. He knew exactly what he was saying. Over the next few weeks, the Triple B ranch became a fortress. Willow refused to leave his side, nursing him with a fierce determination. Mr. Bradley hired extra hands, armed men who patrolled the property day and night. They all knew, without speaking of it, that the danger hadn't passed. The enemy was just regrouping. During the long nights, as Jake drifted in and out of a feverish sleep, he would talk. He murmured names and places Willow didn't recognize. Names from another life. He spoke of a woman named Sarah, a town called Blackwater Gulch, and a betrayal that had cost him everything. One night, while changing the bandage on his chest, something fell from his worn leather wallet, which had been placed on the bedside table. It was a small, tin badge, tarnished and bent, but still recognizable. The badge of a U.S. Marshal. The pieces clicked into place, the fighting skills, the watchful eyes. The reason he knew the name Thaddeus Blackwood. Jake Reynolds wasn't just a ranch hand who had served in the war. He was a lawman. Or he had been. When his fever finally broke, she confronted him. She held up the badge. "Who are you, Jake?" she asked softly. He looked at the badge in her hand, and then at her face. The secrets he had carried for so long were finally too heavy to bear. He told her everything. He had been a marshal, one of the best. He'd been sent to Blackwater Gulch to investigate a smuggling ring, a ring run by Thaddeus Blackwood. He had gotten close, too close. Blackwood had found his one weakness, a woman named Sarah, the town's librarian, whom Jake had fallen for. Blackwood had arranged a trap, using Sarah as bait. It had ended in an ambush. Sarah was killed in the crossfire. Jake had been wounded, left for dead. Disgraced and heartbroken, he had vanished, changing his name, burying his past, and drifting west. He had come to Redemption Creek to forget. And instead, he had found the one person in the world who could make him remember. Now it was her turn. She told him her story. About her father, a junior partner in Blackwood's company. About how he had discovered the truth. Blackwood wasn't just a smuggler. He was a traitor, selling guns to insurrectionists planning to start a new war. Her father had gathered evidence, a secret ledger detailing the transactions. Blackwood had found out and had her father murdered, staging it to look like a robbery. But Annabelle had seen it all. She had grabbed the ledger and run, changing her name, using her mother's maiden name, Johnson, and fleeing west, hoping to find a place so remote that Blackwood's reach couldn't extend. They sat in silence, their two broken pasts laid bare between them. Two people from different worlds, bound together by their shared enemy. "The ledger," Jake said, his voice hoarse. "Where is it?" "I buried it," she said. "Under a loose floorboard in the schoolhouse. It's the only proof." Jake nodded slowly, his mind already working, the old instincts of the lawman kicking back in. "He won't stop," Jake said. "He can't. If that ledger gets out, he'll hang for treason. He'll burn the whole territory to the ground to find it." As if on cue, a shot rang out from outside. It was followed by another, then a volley. The waiting was over. The siege had begun. Mr. Bradley burst into the room, a Winchester rifle in his hand. "They're here," he said, his face grim. "A dozen of them. They've surrounded the house." He tossed another rifle onto the bed next to Jake, "and they're being led by Sheriff Miller." Of course, the sheriff wasn't just on Blackwood's payroll. He was the local commander of his private army. Jake struggled to sit up, his face pale with pain and effort. Willow tried to stop him, but he waved her off. He picked up the rifle, the weapon feeling as natural in his hands as a pen in hers. The look in his eyes had changed. The weary ranch hand was gone. The U.S. Marshal was back. "Annabelle," he said, using her real name for the first time. It sounded strange, and yet right. "Get down. Stay away from the windows." The quiet ranch house of the Triple B became a war zone. Gunfire erupted from all sides, shattering windows and splintering wood. The ranch hands, loyal to the bone, returned fire from the house and the barn, but they were outnumbered. Jake, despite his injuries, directed the defense with a chilling calm. He called out positions, predicted the enemy's movements, his mind a tactical map of the battlefield. Willow huddled on the floor, reloaded rifles, her hands shaking, but her purpose clear. This was it. The final stand. There was no more running. The fighting raged for hours. As dawn approached, there was a lull. "They're preparing for a final push," Jake said, peering through a crack in the shutters. "They'll try to burn us out." "What do we do?" Willow asked, her voice tight with fear. Jake looked at her. Then he looked at the rifle in his hands. A plan was forming in his eyes, a desperate, insane plan. "The ledger is our only weapon," he said. "They think it's here, with you, but they're wrong." He turned to Mr. Bradley. "Is there a way out of here? A tunnel? A cellar?" Bradley nodded. "An old storm cellar. Leads out to the creek bed, 100 yards from the house." "Good," Jake said. He grabbed Willow's hand. His was warm and steady. "You and Mrs. Bradley are going to make a run for it. Take Timothy, ride straight for Cheyenne. There's a federal judge there, an honest man named Parker. Give the ledger to him." "What are you talking about?" Willow cried. "The ledger is at the schoolhouse. I'm not leaving you." A slow smile spread across Jake's face. It was the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. "They don't know that. I'm going to give them a new target." Before she could protest, he was moving. He grabbed a stack of old account books from Mr. Bradley's desk and wrapped them in an oilcloth, making a bundle roughly the size of a ledger. "Mr. Bradley," he said, his voice all authority now. "Give us as much covering fire as you can. Aim for the sheriff. Keep his head down." He turned to Willow, his eyes boring into hers. "You have to go. You have to get that ledger to Parker. It's the only way any of this means anything. It's the only way we win." He leaned in and kissed her, a hard, desperate kiss filled with unspoken promises. "Now go. Live." He didn't wait for an answer. He took the fake ledger, kicked open the bedroom door, and ran down the main staircase, drawing the attention of every gunman outside. Gunshots followed him, chewing up the banister, tearing through the walls. Mr. Bradley grabbed Willow's arm, pulling her toward the back of the house. "He's buying us time, miss. We can't let it be for nothing." Heartbroken, Willow followed him down into the darkness of the cellar. As they crawled through the musty tunnel, she could hear the roar of gunfire intensify above them. She could hear Jake's voice, yelling, drawing their fire, making them believe the prize was with him. He was sacrificing himself. For her. For a future he would never see. They emerged into the pre-dawn light by the creek and ran for the stables. Timothy had 3 horses ready. As they mounted up, they saw it. A flicker of orange against the dark wood of the main house. Fire. They were burning him alive. Willow screamed his name, but the wind and the gunfire stole the sound. Timothy grabbed her reins, forcing her horse into a gallop, away from the ranch, away from the man she loved. They rode for 2 days straight, pushing the horses to their limits. They reached Redemption Creek under the cover of darkness. The town was eerily quiet. The sheriff's office was dark. The Golden Nugget was shuttered. It was a ghost town. Leaving Timothy to watch the horses, Willow crept to the schoolhouse. Her hands trembled as she pried up the loose floorboard. It was still there, the ledger, the key to everything. She clutched it to her chest, a cold, hard rectangle of hope. They rode on, heading for Cheyenne, for Judge Parker, for justice. But every mile they traveled felt like a betrayal, another step away from the smoking ruin of the Triple B, another step away from Jake's grave. 4 days later, they arrived in Cheyenne, exhausted and filthy. They found Judge Parker's office. He was a stern, imposing man with eyes that seemed to see right through you. Willow, her voice raw with grief and exhaustion, told him the entire story, from the murder in Boston to the siege at the ranch. She placed the ledger on his desk. He opened it. He read for a long time, his expression growing darker with every page. When he finally looked up, his face was grim. "Thaddeus Blackwood," the judge said, his voice like stone. "We've suspected him for years, but we never had proof." He closed the ledger. "We do now." He looked at Willow, his expression softening slightly. "You are a very brave young woman, Miss Covington. You have done your country a great service." "What will happen now?" she asked. "I will issue a warrant for Blackwood's arrest on charges of treason. I'll dispatch a unit of marshals to Montana to arrest Sheriff Miller and his men. Justice will be done." Justice. The word felt hollow. It wouldn't bring back her father. It wouldn't bring back the loyal hands who died at the Triple B. It wouldn't bring back Jake. A week later, it was all over. Blackwood was arrested in his Boston office, his criminal empire crumbling around him. Sheriff Miller and his surviving men were captured and facing the gallows. The newspapers were calling Annabelle Covington a national hero, but she felt only empty. She returned to what was left of Redemption Creek. The Triple B was a blackened shell. Mr. and Mrs. Bradley were gone, having moved on to live with family in Oregon. The town was slowly coming back to life, but for Willow it was a graveyard of memories. She went to the town's small cemetery, to the plot where Mr. Bradley had buried the men who fell. There was a simple wooden cross with Jake's name on it. She stood there for a long time, the ledger that had cost so much held tight in her hands. She had won. She had gotten justice. But she had lost everything that mattered. As she turned to leave, a voice stopped her. A voice she had only ever expected to hear again in her dreams. "Took you long enough." She spun around. Leaning against a gnarled old oak tree at the edge of the cemetery was a man. He was thin, gaunt, with new scars on his face and a slight limp. One of his arms was in a sling. But it was him. It was Jake. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching her, his eyes the same deep, sad blue she remembered. "You're alive," she whispered, the words barely making it past the lump in her throat. "But how? We saw the fire." "The fire was a diversion," he said, pushing himself off the tree and taking a slow, painful step toward her. "After you were clear, I made it to the cellar. Bradley showed me. I was burned some, but I got out." He gestured to his leg. "And one of Miller's men got a lucky shot in before they rode off." "Where have you been?" she cried, closing the distance between them, her hands reaching out to touch his face, to make sure he was real. "Healing," he said simply. "An old friend, a trapper, found me, patched me up. I heard what happened, with Blackwood, with the ledger. I heard the schoolteacher from Redemption Creek was a hero." "I thought you were dead," she said, tears finally breaking free. I buried you." "Not yet," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He reached out with his good hand, his fingers gently brushing the tears from her cheek. "I told you, too stubborn to die, had something to live for." He looked into her eyes, and in their depths she saw the promise of a future she thought had been burned to ashes. A future born from violence and secrets, but a future nonetheless. A future that was, finally, their own. They rebuilt. Not just the ranch house at the Triple B, but their lives. The land was given to them by a grateful government. Jake's name was cleared, his rank as a marshal posthumously reinstated, though he politely declined to ever wear the badge again. His days as a lawman were over. They were married in the spring, in the new church built with funds from the Bradleys, who returned once they heard the news. The whole town came. It was a new Redemption Creek, a town that had faced down its own darkness and chosen the light. A year later, standing on the porch of their new home, Willow watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. She held their son, Samuel, named for a brave doctor. Jake came up behind her, wrapping his arms around them both, his chin resting on her head. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "In the saloon." He was quiet for a long moment, watching the last sliver of sun disappear. "I don't believe in coincidence, Annabelle," he said. "I believe I was meant to be in that saloon, just as you were meant to be on that stagecoach." He turned her gently to face him. "Some things are written in the stars, long before we ever know to look up." He kissed her, and in that kiss was the quiet promise of 1,000 more sunsets, of a life built not on the ashes of the past, but on the solid ground of a hard-won peace. A future born when a quiet cowboy decided that some things are worth fighting for, and a runaway schoolteacher decided she was finally done running. If you enjoyed this story of love and redemption on the unforgiving frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You never know what other tales of courage and justice are waiting to be told.